owner.
Welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast with your host, Dr. Randy Cook.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast. I'm Dr. Randy Cook, and I'll be your host for the program. Well, before we get into today's interview, I'd like to be sure and remind everyone that our podcast is produced and sponsored by MD Coaches, a company dedicated to developing and empowering physicians and other healthcare professionals to realize a greater potential and to achieve a greater level of satisfaction in their chosen fields. You can find MD Coaches on the web at mymdcoaches.com. Well, today I'll be talking with Dr. Leah Houston, who is a board-certified emergency physician. Leah has practiced in locum positions in a number of different locations, and her experience with the credentialing process across different hospitals in different states gave her the idea that there really should be a better way to do credentialing. So she has started a company to simplify that whole process using distributed ledger technology. Now, if you are unfamiliar with the term distributed ledger technology, Leah will make it all perfectly clear. I think you'll enjoy the conversation. So let's listen. So I'm talking today with Dr. Leah Houston, who is a board-certified emergency physician, who more recently has involved herself in a big project called HPEC that we're going to talk about a great deal later in the program. But for right now, let me just say hello, Leah, and thank you very much for being with us today.
Hi, Randy. I'm so glad to be on the show. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's very generous of you to spend the time with us because I know you have a lot of things going on, but I'm really looking forward to getting your story out there in front of people. And as is always the case in our show, we like to talk about the developmental stages, and I'm interested to know how you came to be interested in medicine. Was it something that was there for a long, long time, or did it come on you all of a sudden later in your life? Where did that interest come from?
Well, it came from a combination of things, as most people probably also have experienced. But, it was a combination of having an aptitude for science and also really enjoying people and connecting with people and wanting to find a way to combine those two. My father also had epilepsy, so I experienced that in childhood. I spent time in the emergency departments, and so that also might have influenced my decision to do emergency medicine as well.
So at the time that you started to undergraduate school, which was at SUNY, State University of New York in Plattsburgh, had you already made the decision that it was going to be a pre-med curriculum and that's where you would go, or did that decision come a little bit later?
Well, I have to tell you, I guess in some ways I've become a disruptive physician, and I was also a disrupted high school student. I was a bit of a troublemaker. My high school guidance counselor told me I shouldn't even go to college. And so, yeah.
I love these stories. Tell me more.
And so, although I did have this strong aptitude for science, I was a disruptor. I would question the authorities. I would, call out my teachers when they made mistakes, and nobody liked that. So, I also am the first in my family to go to college. So, the idea of college was something that was, a faraway dream. There was a glass ceiling there that needed to be broken. And so the concept of going all the way and getting a doctorate in something was, it seemed a bit out of reach. So I initially thought, well, maybe I'll become a physician's assistant, and I need to really work hard to even get into PA school because that's also competitive. And so I entered not sure if I would be able to get the grades for medical school, but also acknowledging that if I tried hard, I might be able to do it.
And can I ask you, you're relatively young, but I'm wondering if you were influenced in any way by the fact that even at the time that you were considering making the decision, that it was relatively rare for women to be physicians, or did that even enter your head at all? Being a disruptor, you probably didn't even think of it, right?
Well, I was raised by a single mom. My father, I visited occasionally, but it was really, I was raised in a house of women. My grandmother was also a single mother. And, my great grandfather had died at that point. So it was really a family of women, my great aunt, my great grandmother. So I never really, confidence was always instilled upon me. And I never really was told that, you can't do that because you're a girl. It wasn't even part of my framework. So it never even crossed my mind.
Okay. So it was just a matter of making the decision as far as you were concerned. And you mentioned something else about family, Leah, that I would like for you to tell us a little bit about, because I found it fascinating in doing my research on you. And correct me if I'm wrong about this, but I understand that you have a substantial Greek heritage. And did you not have a grandfather or great-grandfather who was a physician as well?
So my great-grandfather's brother, so my great-grand-uncle, was a physician.
I see.
And he actually went to medical school the same place I did.
I'll be darned.
And my uncle, my great-uncle, was a geophysicist.
Wow.
So when I say I was in the first of my family to go to college, it was my parental lineage.
I understand. But was that arm of the family of any influence for you at all, or just a coincidence?
Well, my uncle also, my aunt married a physician, and he was an emergency doctor. I think that influenced me. But the thing, when I talk about a glass ceiling, the glass ceiling was very thin for me because I heard these stories. Oh, your great-great-granduncle was a doctor, and oh, your uncle is a geophysicist, and oh, your uncle by marriage is also a doctor. When a child hears that there are people that are directly connected to them or 1 or 2 degrees of separation from them who have achieved these things, they feel like those goals are much more attainable. And that's why I think mentorship is one of the most powerful things that will help propel youth to their dreams.
So getting back to your education, despite the advice of your high school guidance counselor, you did go to college. And did you find that there was enough challenge there that you were more well-behaved, or did you continue to be a disruptor? What was undergraduate school like for you?
Well, undergraduate was really wonderful because it was the first time in my life that I had control over my destiny. The first time that I got to choose what I wanted to study. But I was a disruptor in some ways. There was a calculus course, I think it was Calculus 2. I had to take up to Calc 3 for my major, where the teacher I found his voice and his style of teaching to be abrasive and obnoxious to the point that I just didn't even want to go to his classroom. And I just, at the beginning, a couple of weeks into the semester, I said to him, "Can I please just take the final exam? And that will be my grade." And he's like, "You're putting yourself at a big risk here," and blah, blah, blah. I mean, I guess I'm also a risk taker in some ways, but I knew what was going to be on the exam. I knew what, needed to be learned to complete Calculus 3. I had a textbook that I could teach myself from. And I said to him, "Please, this is what I want to do." And fortunately, I ended up acing that class, but I didn't go to class. So, I guess in some ways I was a disruptor. I also, although I wasn't accepted into the honors program because you had to have a certain level of, SAT score and a certain GPA from high school in order to get into the honors program, there was a class that I really wanted to take in philosophy. I loved mathematics, even though I struggled with it. I felt it very challenging. I really loved mathematics and how it essentially defines the world around us. And so I went to the honors program director and I said, listen, like there's this class that is teaching Descartes, and I want to learn more about Descartes and his Cartesian plane and where that all came from. And can I please take this philosophy course instead of this other philosophy course that, you know, would be accessible to people who weren't in the honors program? And so I begged a little and he let me in, and I really appreciated that. So in some ways I was a disruptor.
Well, that's it's good to know that you ran into somebody along the way that was willing to recognize your potential. And my experience has been that people like that are relatively rare, and it's very fortunate that you ran into one. But let's move you along a little bit. So when time came to apply to medical school, did you make applications to several, or was it Albany all the way? How did that work out for you?
Well, the application process to medical school is expensive. So
it is.
I don't remember what it was, but you pay a certain amount and you get at least 15 applications, or 10. You get 10 to 15. I don't remember what the number was, but I only applied to those because every medical school after that cost an extra XYZ amount of money, and I just didn't have it. So I did. You know, I applied, I think, to the maximum number with that one baseline application fee. And yeah, I had a few interviews.
And how did you happen to decide on Albany?
The other schools were in New York City and Long Island that I was interviewed at, and in Albany I have free housing. So it was again a money issue to some extent, but also my family was there. And although my mother had moved to Florida by that point, my family home was still there, and my great aunt lived around the corner from the medical school, and so I stayed there and was right around the corner from school. So even though Albany Medical College was a private medical school, fairly expensive tuition in comparison, when you added in the housing costs and the cost of travel and all of that stuff, it still was less expensive than the other options.
That's a pretty good deal.
Yeah.
And again, following up on our previous theme, once you were in medical school, was it easier for you to sort of fall into the routine, or did you feel the need to continue to disrupt, or what was it like?
I loved medical school. I loved undergrad because I was learning the things that I loved to learn about. And a lot of it was, you know, I don't want to say self-directed, but, you know, it was, you get out of it what you put into it.
So even the basic science years, you found that rewarding as well?
Absolutely. I was a bit of a nerd when it came to that. I won an award for organic chemistry. I had a brilliant professor, Dr. Dexter Chris, who really cultivated my aptitude for organic chemistry and also mentored me. And I just found it fascinating. I found it fascinating that we could learn these rules of science that describe the world around us, and so that we can use deductive reasoning to figure out any problem, to solve anything. So it was really, I loved it.
You know, you're the first of the many doctors that I've interviewed that has indicated that they really enjoyed those basic science years. I think that's pretty remarkable, and speaks to your aptitude as a scientist, I might add. And then once you moved into the clinical years, was it the same sort of thing? Was it a sense of fascination that made you want to learn, or was it intimidating? What was it like?
The clinical stuff I didn't find intimidating. I enjoyed the fact that I was able to finally apply this. I mean, I did also work in a lab, and I got to apply the basic sciences in a lab when I was working. I have my undergrad in molecular biology and biochemistry. But when you actually get to see a human being in front of you who's having a real clinical problem, something that's life altering, and you're able to, and it's not always deductive reasoning by any means. Oftentimes it's, you remember that these are the 15 symptoms of this disease and that matches their symptoms. But, occasionally you did have that that patient that wasn't clear and dry case, they have multiple comorbidities, they're on multiple medications, or they have a rare disease that you have to kind of go back into the literature and read about in order to really, help solve the problem that they're presenting with. So I loved it. I loved the clinical part of it too.
Yeah. And at what point did you think that emergency medicine was the place where you belonged?
I don't know if emergency medicine was really the right choice for me. I really loved it, but I also, I'm a problem solver. And I also, from a sociologic and an anthropologic perspective, I didn't want to choose a field that my clinical judgment would be in any way influenced. And, I had talked to some people in some of the surgical subspecialties. I talked to some people who were in family practice. And, if I was in a primary care field, I think that I would feel too connected to my patients. And I think it would be hard for me to not become overwhelmed and consumed with my work. I don't know how I would handle
distance. Yeah,
exactly. I don't know how I would handle, my 62-year-old patient dying, who I started taking care of when they were 22 and, helped deliver 3 of their babies. I don't know how I would handle that. On the other side, from a surgical perspective, I noticed that if you were in private practice, you had to deal with a lot of the business aspect of it and the numbers. And if you weren't in private practice, you were being, pushed to produce and hurry up and do, more surgeries in less time. And even though emergency medicine does have that, in my mind at the time, it didn't have it as much. You took care of who was coming in the door. You did your best for that person. And you didn't have to think about either of those two things.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you did your residency where?
Same place, Albany Medical College. Yeah, Albany had an excellent emergency medicine program. I mean, I didn't realize how well trained I was until I went out into the real world and
pleasant surprise.
Some different places. Yeah, so very fortunate to have trained there.
Yeah, so feeling comfortable with the system and knowing where you are and knowing the people around you, it sounds like residency was, and I'm sure it was physically demanding, but apart from that, reasonably tolerable, would you say?
I was 1 year in when they did the work hour restrictions, and, it was, they were pretending to follow them. We were working way more than 100-hour work weeks. I mean, we just had to say that we weren't. So, but it was my dream. It was my passion. It was what I had worked for all along. And I knew that every instant that I was spending working as an emergency physician was preparing me to be on my own, and preparing me to not have the support system of the training and stuff like that. So even though it was difficult, it was a joy.
So let's take just a short break for a minute or two. I want to take a moment to talk to you about a new sponsor that we have here on Prescription for Success. Physician Outlook is a new magazine platform built for physicians and by physicians, and it's designed to showcase unique physician talents. Sometimes it might be clinical talents, but mostly it's about the intersection between clinical and non-clinical talents, whether it be writing or painting or cooking, or maybe even making a political statement in front of a state and local governing body, or even at the nation's capital, and dozens of other things. It's available online and in print. It's visually stunning on all of its platforms. I promise it's really unique in terms of physician lifestyle magazines. I think you'll really enjoy it. We think it's just the thing to fill your prescription for success. And like the Prescription for Success podcast, Physician Outlook magazine amplifies the voice of any doctor who has something to say, and also uniquely engages patients who still believe in physician-led, team-based care. And Prescription for Success listeners can get $20 off an annual subscription fee by visiting rxforsuccesspodcast.com/Physician Outlook. And now let's get back to today's interview. Once you were finished with your training, I know that you did, or at least I think I know from looking at your bio and your background, it sounds like you've done a good bit of locums work literally in a lot of different locations. Am I correct about that?
Absolutely.
And was that the case from the beginning? I mean, did you ever have a period where there was a fixed base where you stayed for a year or two or not?
No, I mean, my first job was a regular job, and I signed a contract that I now look back and realize was a mafia contract. That basically, you're going to work, 14 days a month, and it's going to be equal, and you're going to share it with the other partners. And, it was an extremely dangerous place to work. I was not being given the resources I need. It was like intubation, resuscitation, intubation, code blue, and on top of that, I was supposedly supervising people in a fast track area that I never got to see those patients. And it was not safe. It was not a safe place to work. And I did that for about 3 months. And I said, I need to be in control of my ability and my right to work. And I think locums is a better choice for me.
Sounds like a pretty smart move. I agree with you. This issue of a physician having an employer, and admittedly, I'm retired after 44 years of practice, and the notion of a physician employer when I started my practice was, nobody ever talked about that. But as we have moved into that direction, I would fear exactly what you're talking about, and that is you're not working for the patient anymore, you're working for the employer, and that puts some restrictions on you. It sounds like you had the same feeling.
Yeah, and I don't want to offend anybody who's listening, but the fact of the matter is when you are employed, there is a conflict of interest. There is no other way to describe it.
Right.
You take a Hippocratic oath to put your patients first, and it is absolutely impossible to uphold that oath and be employed all the time.
Yeah.
You might find blips and moments where you are upholding that oath, where you are putting that patient first. But overall, you are not able to do that 100% of the time. And that is our job as physicians, to uphold that oath 100% of the time.
I couldn't agree with you more. And as I say, this whole idea of the employed physician gives me considerable unease. And I know that perhaps marks me as a hopelessly outdated old man, but you're not. And I think you've stated it very well. So you moved into a locums style of practice, and you did it in a lot of different areas for 10 years. What was that like, being in different localities over that period of time? Sounds very interesting.
It was wonderful in many ways because I got to experience the edges of my comfort zone. I got to learn to adapt to new environments. I got to learn about new ways of being. Different health systems have different ways of allocating resources. And I really got to see how fractured our healthcare system is, really. I mean, that was, I bet you did. The biggest takeaway. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I guess that was probably going to be my next question, and that is, did you see what seemed to be a fair amount of consistency from location to location to location? And it sounds like that you did not, that there was a great deal of variability. Is that correct?
The patients are the same almost everywhere.
Right.
There's a higher percentage of certain types of populations. I worked in Far Rockaway in Queens, New York, and I worked in, the Mission District of San Francisco. And, the number of people experiencing homelessness and drug addiction in those areas was higher. Poverty was higher in those areas. I also worked in, some of the wealthier upscale areas. I worked in the middle of nowhere up in the Santa Rosa near the wine regions. I've worked in Yosemite National Park. The patient's humanity never changes. The volume changes. The access to different resources. Some places when you had a heart attack, I had to transfer you to another hospital because there wasn't a cath lab.
Right.
Some health systems, I ordered blood and it would take 2 hours and other places it would come immediately. So processes are different, resource availability is different. But you learn that usually the first week or two, what works well, what doesn't, and you change how you order things or how you follow up on things based on that. So there is a little bit of a learning curve at every place, but yeah, I mean, also the on-call, there was some places where there was just no neurosurgeon. Oh, what do I do with this patient that has a, midline shift and I just intubated with a, closed head injury? Can't send them to the neuro ICU because there's nobody that's going to be able to do the surgery. And so dealing with having to, manage that and how to manage that without those resources was challenging, but, it taught me a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you really got about as good a look at the depth and breadth of the American healthcare system as one could possibly acquire. And at some place, somewhere along the way, you began to think about the significance and the necessity and the advantage of having a good place to store information about physicians that they needed to have at their disposal for credentialing purposes and so forth. Eventually that morphed into this thing called HPEC that we're going to talk about. But can you tell me about where that idea began and how it developed from that point?
Well, I think the whole time I was practicing medicine, I thought to myself, something's wrong here. This is not the way it's supposed to be. And I didn't really know what it was until later. But you go through medical school and you're told, oh, you're going to have patients and you're going to be able to take care of them. And you're going to have, ancillary staff and nurses that are going to help you. And you're going to have all the resources you need. And then the reality is different. But it wasn't until, 2017, when a hospital actually stole my identity and was billing under my professional brand and my professional name that I realized the reason that I had that feeling that something was wrong has a lot to do with the fact that our healthcare system has become essentially digitized.
And that's a pretty serious glitch. I apologize for continuing to interrupt your story, but I'm curious, did that particular healthcare system do this thing purposefully?
I don't think that they did, but I also don't think that they are making any great efforts to prevent it from happening.
Yeah.
If you look at health system cybersecurity breaches, they're 40% higher than breaches in the financial industry. Now, why is that? It's because they don't really care as much. In the financial industry, you lose $1 million or, people notice that immediately and your customers will be very angry. In the healthcare industry, your patients have no idea if there's been a data breach. The doctors don't even realize there's been a data breach unless it's a rare situation like what happened to me where I found out, and so they have no incentive to fix these problems.
And is there a fairly short explanation for how you found out?
Yeah, I was working in a new place, a new hospital, and they went to bill for my services. And the Center for Medicare and Medicaid said, "Oh, you can't bill because you were practicing medicine without a license."
Wow.
And I said, "What do you mean?" I never practiced medicine without a license. And they said, "Oh, yes, you did. Let me show you these 15 cases that you billed when you were no longer licensed here." And I said, "I wasn't there on those dates. I didn't work in that hospital. I wasn't working there anymore." And so, they were like, "Oh, oops." And then we figured out that they were billing under my professional name after I left, after, my license had lapsed in that state because I wasn't working in that state anymore. So that's how I found out.
That's odd. If they were billing on your provider number and yet you were not even present, it's hard to think they didn't know what they were doing.
Well, this is actually happening a lot. And I encourage everybody to go to PECOS, PECOS, and log in and see who has rights to bill under your name. You might be very surprised. Several physicians who have heard my story have done this, and they found that places that they used to work a long time ago are still have professional access to their identity. And what happened, the only reason this was able to happen is because in my credentialing packet, one of the thousands of sheets that I had to sign and fill out was basically like, it said something along the lines of, I agree to supervise this list of nurse practitioners and physician's assistants. Right. And I signed the bottom thinking in my mind, well, on the days when I'm actually supervising them, when I'm actually overseeing their care, when I actually get to, talk to those patients and I actually get to review those charts, then yes, I will supervise those cases. But what the hospital did was they said, oh, we'll just have her supervise these people on these 15 dates, whether she's there or not, and we'll just put her name on there. And that's professional identity theft,
Exactly.
Sorry.
And what you're into right there, Leah, is something that has really been a terrible bother to me for a very long time. And one reason why I'm so excited about what you're doing with HPEC. And just to give you a little history, obviously I've been in the system for a very long time, but back in 1996, I think Bill Clinton signed the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, the purpose of which was to protect sensitive patient information from disclosure without patient consent. And in truth, what happened was, because the people that became entitled to see that information were every insurance company on earth.
Bingo.
And they swapped it around and spread it around without any care at all, because they were, I think, what they were called a covered entity. So far from protecting the patient's privacy, it actually obliterated it. And that was back in 1996. And so we're going to segue into the 21st century. And I want you to tell us some more about why that's a problem and your idea to do something about it. So go right ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. HIPAA is not a privacy act. It's an anti-privacy act. It's we get to share your information with whoever the hell we want. Please sign here act. There's no true informed consent around it. They force you to sign it or else you won't be able to get health care. So I personally think that's a big problem. The way things are supposed to be is a doctor bills for a service that was rendered. And if it is a covered service, it should be paid, and then insurance companies, if they see outliers, if they see people who are billing for more of this and more than that, they can do some investigation of their choice. But what this HIPAA Act and what the HITECH Act of 2009 did was essentially it created a surveillance model around healthcare, where insurance companies are now surveilling our behavior as doctors, and they're surveilling the services that patients are getting. And they have all this data and they've captured it. And then they're doing data analytics on it to try to find out ways to make more money, to save more revenue for themselves, to deny payments to doctors and to deny services to patients. And that's all it is.
And it's working out very well for them. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's hurting doctors and patients. If you look, the cost of healthcare has skyrocketed. It went from 3.2 trillion to 3.6 trillion this year. Physician payments are decreasing. Patient services are decreasing. Deductibles are going up. Prior authorizations are going up. So-called surprise bills that shouldn't be surprised because the services were rendered are going up. And all the while you look at United Healthcare, Aetna, Cigna, MultiPlan, Blue Cross Blue Shield, and any other of the big health insurance companies. You look at their quarterly revenue, they're making record profits, and they're making record profits off of the suffering of our patients.
Not to mention the suffering of the physicians. So you got an idea about how we might be able to turn that trend around. Let's hear it.
Well, there are several things that have gone on recently in the healthcare industry. In July, the 21st Century Cures Act was finalized. And that is essentially a privacy act for patients. And it says that patients deserve to have immediate access to their records and that blocking that information is going to be illegal. Now, if you think about how we currently document as physicians, we are using electronic health record systems right now. And we are entering all of this information onto these electronic health record systems. Now, those systems are now going to be responsible for making sure that patients have easy access to it. Now, back in the day when a doctor had their own records in their office, you just called your doctor's office and asked them for that information. There is a new secure technology that will essentially allow for a physician to document what happened in the encounter. And that documentation is made automatically and immediately available to the patient at the time that documentation is completed. So there'll be no more need for a patient to request the records because it happens automatically. And there will be no risk of data brokers and surveillance models and third parties to see this without that patient's permission. And so that's the system that we're building. And the first step to building that system is creating the initial login, identity and credentialing platform for the physician community so that they can participate in these systems that will be built. And that's what HPEC is about. HPEC is building this self-sovereign identity and credentialing solution for practicing physicians.
Fascinating, what I've been able to read about it. So give us some of the details. How does HPEC help? How does it work?
So, right now, when you log in to, the internet, sometimes you might notice that you can log in using your Google ID or your Facebook ID. If you've noticed that, that's called single sign-on technology or SSO. That's been the standard to make signing on to things easier and giving you less password friction and password fatigue. The issue is when you use that technology in the background, Facebook and Google not only own and control your ability to sign into that system, but they are now tracking you. They're tracking your behavior. They're following you through the internet. That's unnecessary with this new technology called self-sovereign identity technology. And this is still a very nascent idea. It's still, it's developed, but it's not as robust as the single sign-on technology is, but it's getting there. And with this self-sovereign identity technology, you will own your one sign-on. And only you will have control over that sign-on and any of the data that it generates. And this will allow you to move through any web application privately and securely. And it will create privacy and trust for doctors and patients. When you think about doctors logging in to an EHR in an anonymous and private way, they can document, own their own documentation, and then transfer that directly to the patient in a secure fashion rather than having it stored on this centralized EHR database. They can either store it in a decentralized way, in an encrypted way, or on their own private servers, or a combination of both, which will probably be what ends up happening. And so when the doctor has the copy and the patient has the copy, there's no need for anybody else to see it. And I'd like to hear an argument for why other people need to see it. And if they need to see it, they're welcome to pay that patient for that data, because that's who should be getting paid for that data. If they want it, they need to pay for it.
Exactly. So talk a little bit about how physicians can benefit dramatically by having their professional information stored in a place where they can get to it, but no one else can.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. I mean, I'm talking about the patients and the long-term, the long-term vision that we have, because it is about the patients. Without patients, we can't be doctors. But, the most important baseline foundational piece of this is us owning our professional brand, owning our professional credentials. And this is a complete identity solution for the practicing physician. When we're logging into EHR, they're capturing that data oftentimes if you read the fine print, even if you're in private practice and you read the fine print of your EHR database, you don't own that information. If you want to transfer it to another system, you probably have to pay them a huge amount of money in order to transfer that over. And a lot of people in private practice have noticed this problem. And the reason is because they're monitoring you, they're tracking you, they're watching your prescribing patterns, they're watching your referral patterns, and they're selling that data to the highest bidder. And that's your data, that's your private information. You should have a right to understand your patterns. You should have a right to do your own data analytics. And, when we build the HPEC solution, you will have your professional identity. You will have your rights to log in. You will have your rights to anything that you generate. And when you think about it, our Fourth Amendment property rights as Americans in this country, anything you create, you own. And so if you're creating the record around your patient's health, yes, okay, you're using the software, but if we create a software that allows you to own it rather than these third parties, then, the only people that'll be doing data analytics on you is you, unless you give permission or to other entities and also sell your data around this stuff. And the physician data industry is a very moneyed industry. Keeping updated records around who we are, our addresses, our emails, our phone numbers, our location, our MPI numbers, our DEA numbers, our license, and expiration dates. That is information that's outside entities desperately want to know all the time.
And I think what you're getting at is that physicians not only have a significant personal interest, or should have a significant personal interest in maintaining possession of that information, but it's very important for their own protection for them to have complete control over it, right? Yes,
it's absolutely important for your own protection, but it's also your right. If you're a surgeon in a large health system, you have a right to know how much you build. You have a right to know how much you're bringing into that institution, and you have a right to renegotiate your salary based on that. But if they're hoarding the data around that information and not letting you have access to it, that's a problem for me. And the interesting thing about what we're building with HPEC is that it's a complete identity solution. So similar to how you're able to communicate via email or on social media via messaging, you can use this identity to communicate securely and directly with your colleagues, regardless of their practice location, regardless of whether they are employed or aren't employed. And I think that that's one of the greatest benefits, because it will create a decentralized networking system for physicians to remain independent and to stay independent.
For any physicians who might be interested, who would like to take advantage of HPEC, how would they do that?
So we are actually currently in the middle of a crowdfunding campaign. I think we have about 80 days left as of today, the recording of this podcast. And what that means is that anyone can become an investor in this. And there's actually a lot of patients that also see the value in this and have also invested. So today you can become an owner, an equity shareholder for as little as $250. By going to our website and clicking the Invest Now button, or by going to the Fundopolis crowdfunding page. And we're actually the leading trender on Fundopolis. This is a very big pie in the sky idea, but it's a very, timely solution to the current problem of physician disempowerment and lack of privacy. So I hope you guys decide to become a part of it.
It's easy for me to think back over my rather lengthy career when I wish I had this sort of a resource at my disposal. And I'm going to give you one very quick little example that I think fits nicely with what you're talking about. I practiced for a little over a decade in Florida. And after I left, I found out that I had been named in a malpractice suit. We went through the usual processes. It turned out there were a total of 4 parties in the suit. There was myself, my group, and 2 other additional physicians. The discovery process went on, and clearly at some point the plaintiff's attorney realized they didn't have anything, and they came and said, we can close this thing up if everybody will, if each one of the parties will agree to pay $5,000 each, and there will be no admission of guilt and so forth and so on. So in any case, I'm practicing in another state by that time. My attorney called and said, "Do you want to participate in this?" I said, "Absolutely not. I'm not going to do anything that can be construed as an admission of liability, so count me out." Well, the other three parties paid, and as far as I was concerned, it was over. About a year and a half went by, and I got a call from the medical secretary at my hospital who said, "Hey, we got a problem with your recredentialing, right? This recredentialing thing." And the problem was that I had given false information on the question that said, "Have you ever had to pay a malpractice claim?" And of course, I had answered no. Well, I had to chase that down. And to shorten the story as much as I can, because my group, my previous PC group in Florida had agreed to be a party to the settlement, they had put my name into the database, that great big physician database out there that where everybody's name goes if you settle a malpractice suit. And the interesting thing is that once your name goes in, as you are well aware, you can't get your name out. There's no appeal. You can't talk to anybody. It's just done. So what you have,
I would have thought that. I don't know, because you said no.
Well, I chased it as far as I could, and the fortunate thing was, once I knew it was there, I was not ever going to make that mistake again. I would just simply explain myself. But that is my best story of what happens when you lose control of your data. And if I had at my disposal a system that kept my data where only I had control over it, where only I could answer those questions, where only I could respond to those questions, it could have been entirely different. And that's exactly what HPEC is giving us, in my estimation. And I don't know what else to say other than good job. You've really come up with something brilliant, and I can't imagine that it's not going to be fantastically successful.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I appreciate you sharing that story. I have to tell you, since I started working on this, I'm hearing stories like this from everyone. There are almost no doctors who haven't experienced something. And a lot of them have just found a way to wiggle out of it. And now they're just a little more careful. But, of all the stories I've heard, I've never heard one where it truly was a negligent situation on behalf of the physician. It's just,
right.
It's really terrifying that your career can be ruined or tarnished because of somebody else's clerical error.
Exactly. And in in the policy of the data bank, it wasn't an error. They said that they were doing exactly what they were tasked with, and that is to write down the names of everybody that had ever settled a malpractice claim, and they did that for good reasons. There were doctors, there were bad actors that were going from state to state, leaving bad results behind them, and there was no way to catch up with them. So I understand the good intentions, but the point is, without being willing to involve every individual actor in those questions, it can do a great deal of damage. And this system that you've come up with is just a brilliant solution. And I don't think we've even said the word blockchain since we started the conversation, but that is at the basis of why it works. Am I not correct about that?
That's correct. I mean, people say, well, why hasn't this been built already? If it's, something that's so amazing, it's because technology is new. The way that this can be done is new. Our current way of communicating digitally always requires a third party. If you're transferring money from your bank account to mine, we require PayPal or Bank of America or MasterCard or some other third party to allow us for that to happen. In healthcare, we require some form of third party in a similar way. This technology provides secure, direct communication without the need for a third party. And that's what's so powerful about it.
Yeah, you get to decide who uses your information and what you do with it. And how could anybody disagree with that plan?
Absolutely.
That's just brilliant.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, Dr. Leah Houston, it has been a real pleasure to speak with you today. We actually typically end the show by asking people to give us a point-by-point prescription for success, but I think you've already done that. You are a disruptor. You're on the lookout for great ideas, and when you get a great idea, you put it into action. I don't think I've ever seen a better example than that. So, congratulations.
Thank you. I appreciate it, and I appreciate you allowing me to share, this really revolutionary opportunity with people. It's something very special, and I think it's going to change things for us as doctors and patients.
I have a feeling you're correct. And before we go, I want to give you an opportunity to tell the audience about any websites, email addresses, Twitter handles, anything that you would like to share so that we can follow you and keep up with you and get in touch with you if we would like to.
Amazing. Thank you. So our website is hpec.io, and that's HPEC.io. And our social media handle is HPEC ID. This is an identity platform. And then, of course, you can also reach out to me. I'm on Twitter a lot. I try to respond to private messages within 24 to 48 hours. And that's at Leah Houston, MD. And I really encourage everybody to take a look at our website. There's a lot of information on there, and consider becoming a part of the movement. Whether you hit the join us button to be made aware when this technology becomes available, it's currently in development, or whether you want to actually become an investor and own a piece of this company with us. It's already there's already been over 150 physicians who have invested over $300,000, and we're trying to keep this physician owned, but anybody who cares about the future of healthcare can become a part of this today.
Fabulous. Dr. Leah Houston, emergency room physician and disruptor, thanks again so much for being with us. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise. Thank you.
And that brings us to the close of another episode of Prescription for Success. Please don't forget that you can subscribe to our podcast and get more information about our guests by reviewing the show notes on our website at rxforsuccesspodcast.com. And please be sure to leave us a comment. And if you feel inclined, give us a 5-star rating as well. Finally, another way you can support the show and get some additional benefits is to become a patron by visiting patreon.com/RX for Success podcast. Thank you so very much for listening today, and don't forget to fill your prescription for success with my next episode.